and I've mentioned those before. It will basically strengthen the region's resilience to the impacts of severe tropical cyclones by protecting communities, also economies, the sectors, governance, and also an investment in infrastructure. Ladies and gentlemen, that brings me to the end of the presentation, but let me end by saying this is not just ambitious, this is a fully endorsed and presented to you on a global stage, the Pacific's plan to be weather ready. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Director Tangaloa, for a very comprehensive presentation of the Weather Ready decadal program for the Pacific. A lot of us here have never heard of this or what it is about, but thank you very much. You've shed light on what it is about, and I hope our partners who are present here and who are also joining online will be able to speak to the Weather Ready decadal program through your networks and through your partnership. Thank you very much for that. I would now like to invite Dr. Max Dilley, the Director of Climate Services of the World Meteorological Organization, to speak on what are some of the emerging needs relating to weather, climate, hydrology, ocean, and marine information and warning services that require such an ambitious investment in the Pacific.
Thank you, Philomena. I think I'll stand up. Just if I had known we had such a marvelous screen, I would have prepared a PowerPoint. But at the end, I think because of the topic of the event, which is about an investment plan, I'll end up talking about money and how to get it. It wouldn't be as nice as all the pictures we've seen earlier in events that have wonderful corals and ocean views. So maybe it's better I'll just speak. I'm Max Dilley. I'm from the World Meteorological Organization. The World Meteorological Organization, WMO, is the United Nations specialized organization. That's the authoritative voice on weather, water, and climate. And we support a network, a global network of national meteorological and hydrological services that are the sources of the information that would be supported by the Decadal Investment Program. Now, earlier this week on Sunday, as we do every year, we launched the Provisional State of Climate Report for 2021. It's provisional because the year isn't over yet. And I'll just give some statistics from that report. This year will be between the 5th and the 7th warmest year on the recorded record. The last 7 years have been the 7 warmest years on record. Greenhouse gas concentrations are at their highest recorded levels ever. Sea level is at its highest recorded record ever, and so is ocean heat content. So, we see these indicators moving in the direction that we all hoped and are striving to prevent. And yet, there is a 40% chance that in the next 5 years, one of those years will be a global mean temperature of over 1.5 degrees Celsius. So we are really getting to the lower limit of what the Paris Agreement is trying to avoid in terms of the global mean temperature. And this is going to have consequences, and indeed it's already having consequences. And then on top of that, the Pacific region, and especially the small island developing states, are in this condition of kind of unique vulnerability. We add on top of climate change, of course, the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic, and here you have effects on tourism, you have effects on livelihoods, from families that have family members working abroad that are sending remittances back to the islands. And therefore, we have had a global economic downturn that has consequences for the region that makes it really a kind of a unique environmental and economic environment that all of this has to work together to try to adapt. So I'll just say, because I'm going to now turn to the sort of the regional context, that on Thursday, and I hope Tanaloa you'll be able to be the moderator for this event, we'll release the first ever report on the state of the climate in the Southwest Pacific region. And that report goes up through 2020, which is the last year for which we have a full set of data. And I was looking at the report to prepare for this event, and what struck me were some of the impacts that were recorded during that calendar year. Tanaloa already talked about some of the things that have happened this year as well, but its impacts on food insecurity. There are adverse impacts on human health. There were losses and damages to infrastructure. I was struck by Typhoon Harold that hit Vanuatu. 60% of GDP in 2020 was the loss and damage associated with that event. So we have a need for early warning systems, but we also have a need for climate information and climate services in general that can help with the planning and the projections and the information that's going to be needed to protect these islands and these societies across all of these vulnerable sectors. Turning to the decadal investment program that Tanaloa already introduced, these investment areas are very much aligned with the kind of support that the World Meteorological Organization supports its members. There's governance and coordination. There's the observing infrastructure, the observing systems and the data processing systems that are needed to handle weather and climate and water information. There are forecasting systems, which are what the early warnings are based on. And then there's communication of the information to the users, to the populations that need warnings, but also to planners and to responders, so that they get the warnings and understand what the potential consequences are and can react. And then finally and crucially, there's capacity development and training. And what we have done up until now, and thank you for those kind words, Tanaloa, is through the various programs that WMO receives funding for, we have allocated those resources into trying to support the Southwest Pacific. So you may have heard of the Climate Risk and Early Warning System. That's been a very important initiative, a multi-donor initiative that has provided a kind of a continuous low but significant level of support into the region. And then more recently, the European Commission has funded CLIMSA, the Climate Intra-ACP project, as we call it. That's brought another 8 million euros into the Pacific region. So we layer these project financing streams on top of each other. And I think that's one of the ways that the decadal investment plan is going to be financed, is through a succession of projects. And that being the case, I'll just highlight that on October 7th, the Green Climate Fund, finally, after years of struggle, approved a early warning system strengthening project, $21.7 million US for Timor-Leste. So we see that with proper information and project preparation, it's possible to get projects funded on the order of magnitude that's going to be needed to resource the decadal investment plan. And I was involved, and so were my colleagues in helping with the preparation of that project. One of the key ingredients is something called the climate rationale. It's the climate science analysis that tells you what the past behavior and the trend has been in some of the key climate indicators, and including the extreme events. And these can be everything from typhoons to marine heat waves and coastal inundation. But also, the climate rationale includes non-climatic contributing factors to the impacts, because the impacts of these events are not just direct consequences of the events, they're consequences of the interaction of these events with infrastructure, with sectors, with populations. And to really be able to get a better outcome, those are the things that we can change. We can't change the magnitude of the typhoons, we can't change the temperature of the ocean or the pH, but we can try to adapt through our social economic processes so that those events aren't as damaging, and that we adapt and get better outcomes as a result of the investments. So the climate rationale includes the climate, but it also includes these non-climatic contributing factors. And the GCF is partnering with WMO so that the investments address those scientifically grounded factors, and that therefore the projects are likely to be successful because they take full account of all of these things. So yesterday, I think it was, or 2 days ago, with the Green Climate Fund, we launched the tools and methods that will support that kind of analysis. And not only that, I think that in the widespread release of the analytical tools and methods, we will be able to identify the specific improvements that are needed in the hydromet systems and services that are identified in the plan already, and cost them out and include them in project proposals that then would go to the Green Climate Fund, just the way the one for Timor-Leste. And that is a way that the climate analysis can be unpacked into project proposals that can go into the Green Climate Fund pipeline for possible funding. So I said I was going to conclude by talking about money. There it was. And I think that with this plan, the region is very well positioned to go to the Green Climate Fund and some of the other climate finance mechanisms with very sound proposals that are based on climate science that will really have the effects that the investment plan intends to have. So let me just close by saying that we're really looking forward to working with SPREP and with the countries in the region, as well as the other United Nations partners and the other partners that are involved in this, to achieve an SDG vision by 2030, where society is more resilient to the kinds of real challenges that the Pacific and this region faces. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Daly, for those remarks and your insight into the investment program. I do have a follow-up question, but I will come back to you after this. I would now like to invite one of the longest-serving MIT director in the region. I can't call him the grandfather of the MIT directors because he will give me the evil eye after this. Let's welcome Mr. Chanel Iroy, the Deputy Secretary of the Ministry of Environment, Climate Change, Disaster Management of the Government of Solomon Islands. Mr. Iroy, what do you think is the value of this decadal program in enhancing the capacity and the resources that our very poor national MIT services have at the moment?
Thank you, Philomena, for those introductions. Good evening and warm welcome to all our fellow panelists dignitaries, colleagues, friends, and everyone who are joining us both here and the conference and also virtually. I cannot reiterate enough how the Pacific region is, and as the global climate change and extreme weather becomes more intense and frequent, the need for enhancing climate change adaptation and resilience through the role and integration of meteorological and hydrological services across all social, environmental, and economic platforms is more important. As we all know, the recent IPCC report has continued to provide us the agency for what we are talking about here, and also we know that this report has confirmed the vulnerability of the Pacific region to the changing climate, but also to the impacts of the extreme weather events. To answer your question, moderator, I must say that compared to the investment to support preparedness to climate impacts through adaptation, there has been much less direct investment in terms of resources to support preparedness and response to extreme weather, water, ocean, and other environmental events at shorter timescales. Much of the investment at weather timescales has been in the context of changing frequency and the intensity of extreme events as a result of climate change. Without dedicated investment at these shorter timescales, there has been a lack of coherence, collaboration, and coordination in activities, resulting in a patchwork of capacity building efforts and incompatibility of infrastructure, technology, methodology, and approach in the weather, hydrology, and ocean domains. This has created a downstream maintenance and replacement cost challenges, and has hindered the necessary meteorological, hydrological, and oceanic collaboration between Pacific countries and the crucial input of the needed data to global and regional numerical weather prediction models from the data sparse Pacific to global data producing centers and regional centers. Consequently, this limits the opportunity to generate and provide numerical weather prediction products through the cascading process, and eventually to enable national Pacific meteorological services to provide the most basic forecasting and warning system services for our countries and our respective communities. This decadal program of investment will complement existing initiatives at the regional scale that are often focused on a single issue or a constraint to a few countries. It aims to drive a step change in national meteorological and hydrological services that is sustainable in the long term. Achieving a weather-ready Pacific Island countries and territories will deliver significant economic, safety, and security benefits to the region and the Pacific Island communities. Effective hydrometeorological services improve the resilience of the region against risks of weather, climate, hydrological, ocean-related natural disasters, and can further improve the quality of critical decisions that are made in sectors that are sensitive to the extreme weather events. It will also reduce undue human losses and suffering and minimize the consequences for the natural environment, social and economic systems upon which the Pacific Islands communities depend on for their sustenance and livelihoods. The decadal weather-ready program of investment, although daunting at first glance, but clearly the human and the financial burden of delayed action is higher than the cost of investing through the proposed 10-year program of investment. So I'm calling for putting in the resources to invest now rather than delayed action. At this juncture, Ms. Moderator, I would like to acknowledge the Pacific Meteorological Council and all its partners for the courage and the foresight to take on this important task, and also acknowledge the Pacific leaders for endorsing this plan. I wish you all a productive week of discussions, and I look forward to continue to work closely with all our meteorological services in the region and donor partners, and also friends, to ensure that we have a shift and scale up efforts that will allow us, the region, to move closer to a weather-ready Pacific in the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Mr. Iroy. I have a follow-up question with Dr. Dilly. You know, the Pacific is one of the poorly covered region by observation equipment and networks. I am aware that the WMO is also, you know, involved in the review of project proposals to the GCF. If the services by Met officers is viewed as a life-saving service, then what do we need to do to make sure that the donors and the partners see the value of investing in the Met services, in the observation equipment, in building their capacity?
Thank you. That's a very good question. I'll try to give a succinct answer. I should say, though, that WMO is in a what I would call a technical advisory role to the Green Climate Fund, but we don't get involved in the review of individual projects. The technical advice is really to accredited entities and countries on the preparation of projects. So it's you know, the approval process is done through something called the ITAP, the Independent Technical Assessment Committee, or something like that. Just that aside, this and Tanaloa really outlined it in the PowerPoint that she gave. The provision of warnings or any other kind of service is a full value chain proposition. And on the left-hand side of the value chain, if you will, you have observing equipment that has to be maintained, it has to be operated 24/7, 365, and it has to be operated for decades. I mean, it's not something that you just start and stop and start and stop. These stations, we have a program that recognizes stations with 100-year-long records. They're called centennial stations. That's the gold standard. And especially now that we're talking about climate, it's even more important to have that continuity. But the observations are crucial for being able to issue warnings or even just weather forecasts. So then moving, you know, sort of from left to right across the value chain, you need to capture that data on a regular basis throughout the day, every day. And that data gets fed into global models, which are here in Europe. There's one here in the United Kingdom. They're in Australia, they're in Russia, they're in the United States. And those global models are run on supercomputers. And the output fields from those supercomputers come back down to the meteorological services, and that is the inputs that the meteorological services use to generate the forecasts, because those models assimilate observations from all around the world. And since weather is generated by the general circulation of the atmosphere and oceans around the entire world, you need to have all of those inputs in order for any given country to be able to issue forecasts. I think this was mentioned in Tanaloa's presentation. There's a need to make sure that the the Pacific Islands are connected into that global data processing and forecasting system. No country in the world, the United Kingdom or any other, does this on their own. It's a global system that all countries rely upon. Then you go to your forecasts and your warnings, and then preparedness to respond to those warnings. So now I'm on the right-hand side of the value chain, and those preparedness measures are often a breakdown. The communication of the warnings and the ability to take effective action are shown in some of our State of Climate Services reports to be where some of the biggest gaps are. So there is, I'm sure, a need to strengthen across that whole value chain all of those different components. There was launched yesterday something called the Systematic Observation Financing Facility, which is an attempt to provide sustained financing to fill some of the big areas of the world where we have observing system gaps. The Pacific is one of those regions. It's really not fair to expect a small island developing state to pay for the costs of radiosondes and for operating all of this equipment when it's really a global public good. So we're putting in place mechanisms to help with the observations, but we're also through the Green Climate Fund and the other projects that I mentioned, trying to provide that support across the whole end-to-end, from the observations right through to effective actions. I hope that.
Thank you very much for that response. I'd like to ask anybody on the floor if anybody has any question for our esteemed panel. Yes, the young lady in front.
Yeah, my name is Naima Pepita. I'm flying in from Hawaii, but I have family and connections in Tuvalu, where they are incorporating traditional ecological knowledge as part of their weather forecasting models. And I just wanted to know whether there was a role being played by traditional ecological knowledge, whether that was being incorporated in this new program that is underway, if any.
I'll ask Director Tangaloa to go first to respond to your question.
Thank you very much. You know, that question speaks to the core of building resilience in the Pacific from the ground up. We need this weather decadal program to underpin all the science to services, all of the resilience building activities that support the communities. I can tell you without a doubt that the traditional makeup, traditional knowledge of the Pacific was fundamental to designing this project. And this is because the Met directors in the Pacific have said we can no longer utilize science and not translate it into our own national context and into our traditional construct of what it means to be a Pacific Islander. You know, and I know, that we read the signs, we read what the trees tell us, we read what we hear and heed what the birds tell us. And depending on those signs, we know what to farm, we know where to fish. We'd also associate those signs with our traditional medicines. And so we would completely miss the mark if we were to design a program that did not incorporate the core of who we are, and that is our traditional knowledge. And there are some seeds through, Dr. Dilly mentioned this project, the cruise. It's really cool, really innovative, and it's grassroots. So the program with WMO, with the many cruise partners, looks at what do the different countries need, and then that's the response. And it's interesting because some of our Pacific Island countries have developed glossaries of indicators of traditional knowledge. Do you know, and I promise moderator that I will end soon. But you know, some of our elders now say our trees no longer tell us what they used to tell us. And why is that? It is because of climate change. So our trees are not the way they used to be. They're not growing the way they used to be. They used to. So now what we do in the cruise project, which is a building block to the weather decadal plan, is to look at what the indicators are in the countries. And so when you put into a room a women's council, a community, the girls' brigade and boys' brigade and youth who have collected traditional knowledge, you are not just collecting knowledge, you are ensuring that knowledge, the importance of that knowledge is being invested into the heart of young people and validates them. And when you look at the knowledge, there is a scientific explanation for why the fish are no longer plentiful this season. There's a scientific explanation for that. And yet there is a traditional indicator that matches that. So that informs also our preparedness and our ability to respond. Really good question.
Thank you very much for your response, Director. Any reaction from Chanel on that question?
Thank you, Moderator. I think that question is an excellent question. Currently, we have a traditional program, as Tangla was mentioned, in the region. But we know that documenting traditional knowledge is a daunting task. And so therefore, part of this decadal program is to ensure that the work continues, because we have our islands are scattered, and therefore to reach other islands and the communities is very expensive because of the scatteredness of the islands. So, and we know that the information that the old people have, we need to document them before they die. So it's an important task that the National Meteorological Services are carrying out with the help of our partners. So this decadal programs ensuring that this work continues, and it will help us in the future in terms of the work that we are doing in terms of climate adaptation too. But we know that the traditional knowledge, the information that our old people, our grandfathers and grandmothers and our parents have, it's very important in terms of the work on our climate change, but also in terms of using traditional knowledge for extreme weather events and disaster risk management. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chanel, for that response. I would like to just refer to our friends joining virtually. If there are any questions on the screen, please. No questions on the screen, but just comments, just to say that this is a very excellent side event. I am conscious of the time. All right, we've got 2 more minutes. And this question is directed to the director of the Climate Change Resilience Program, who actually supported the development of this decadal investment program. Director, if you were in the elevator with a millionaire, how would you sell this investment program? You've heard Chanel said it might be a daunting program. It's a thick document. How would you sell this so that the people in our region get the information that they would need?
Wow. That's a really good question. Would I have 1 or 2 minutes with the millionaire?
2 minutes and finish, please.
Right. I wouldn't talk about the detail of the project, but I would say this. If you are serious about building resilience and about climate change and about global dialogue and, reducing the impacts of climate change, then here you have a plan that is well rationalized, that is well researched, it is based on science, based on history, and it comes with the highest endorsement of the full Pacific leadership. And we have a moral authority to call on your support, and you need to be part of history.
And show me the money.
And show me the money. Where's the...
Thank you very much, Director.
Transformational.
I don't think the millionaire will pour in the money. That's too long. But thank you very much, Director. Thank you so much, Dr. Max Steely, for your time. And Deputy Secretary Chanel Iroy, colleagues, thank you so much for taking the time to join us for this important side event, life-saving side event. Please talk to your partners or the people that you know that has the money and interested in investing in this. Tell them to please invest in the Pacific through the Weather Ready Decadal program. And that's it, ladies and gentlemen. Have a good evening. So far, so good.
Mahalo.